The future of America will, to some extent, depend upon the messages about the culture that people get both from popular culture and particularly from our universities. Why? Because increasingly in the United States of America, people who lead this society are university trained. And they are generally trained at a handful of elite universities. So a book like The Politically Incorrect Guide to English and American Literature, the new book by Elizabeth Kantor, Dr. Elizabeth Kantor, who herself is an editor of the Conservative Book Club and has a Ph.D. in English from the University of North Carolina. A book like The Politically Incorrect Guide to English and American Literature is sure to be controversial and is worth discussing. To try to discuss it fairly, we wanted to bring on someone who strongly disagrees with the points that Elizabeth Kantor makes in her book. Those points include the idea that it is impossible for traditional ideas, particularly for respect for Christianity, what is called the patriarchy, what is called traditional patriotism, military virtues. All of that, she says, gets no respect from university English departments. Disagreeing with her in this regard is Professor Michael Berube. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, Professor.
Oh, sure, Berube.
Berube, thank you. Let me get that right. He is a professor in literature, teaching cultural studies at Pennsylvania State University, and is the author of many books. Let me turn first to Dr. Kantor. If there was one message above all the others that you wanted to communicate to people about your book, which is posted to our website, that message would be?
Would be that a traditional education in English literature is a great thing for people individually and a great thing for our culture, and that if you're unable to get that education in the English department of the university you attend, you may have to teach it to yourself.
And do you agree with her assessment, Professor Berube?
Well, I probably disagree with what she thinks of as a traditional education.
In what sense?
Well, let me go by your summary. Respect for patriarchy, respect for military virtues, respect for Christianity. These seem to me explicitly political goals for literary study, and I'm not sure those were part of a traditional apparatus, a traditional curriculum.
Dr. Kantor?
What I'd say is that I don't think English professors should set out to teach people straight out to be excited about the military or Christians or I'm not sure exactly the third one. Excited about the patriarchy. But I do think that English professors should be teaching them the literature that is the greatest literature in English, and that literature introduces them to traditional Western culture, which has a lot of those values. I think that would be a better idea than what's going on in a lot of English departments, including in Professor Berube's classes, as he describes them in his book, What's Liberal About the Liberal Arts, which includes the teaching of postmodernism, for example, and a class on American literature that is sort of organized around race, class, and gender.
Professor Berube, is there too much emphasis on race, class, and gender, on enriching the canon, I think is one of the buzzwords that is frequently used by featuring the work, perhaps sometimes even undeserving work, by non-dead white males?
Let me answer first by way of what my book actually does do. The chapter that Professor Kantor, or Dr. Kantor references is titled Race, Class, Gender, and I have to say that my editor and I exchanged a knowing smile when we did that because we knew we'd get that kind of fire. The authors discussed in that chapter are William Dean Howells, dead white guy in good standing, Willa Cather, among the finest of women American writers in our literature, James Weldon Johnson, an absolutely brilliant African-American writer, and this guy, F. Scott Fitzgerald. I forget what he wrote. It's something about this guy Gatsby. So it's a pretty traditional chapter, and I discuss those works pretty thoroughly in their historical context, and I do so in order to help my students not only read the literature as literature, but to read it in terms of what it was responding to at the time. And I really think all four works and all four writers are quite brilliant. So I actually would agree with Dr. Kantor about something else, that the goal of teaching students literature is to enable them to read more literature. The chapter on postmodernism is a chapter on an honors seminar for undergraduates that dealt with both with controversies in contemporary philosophy and with, I hate to say it, but a lot of contemporary writers actually write this stuff. Most of that class was in literature. It wasn't brought in from the outside. But let me answer your question about enriching the canon, because let me stop there, and I'll give Dr. Kantor a chance.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Dr. Kantor, you suggest in your book that kids are going through literature departments today without real knowledge of some of the richness in American and English literature and world literature, truly. What are they missing?
Well, there are a couple things that I pointed in the Politically Incorrect Guide are going on in English departments. I think there really are two problems with the curriculum. One of the problems is that works by those derided dead white males are being replaced in many classes with things that I hope Professor Berube would agree are not really English literature. In his postmodernism class, for example, a large portion, at least of his chapter on the class, and I don't know if that reflects the class or not, is devoted to the philosophy, to European philosophy, the philosophy of Jürgen Habermas and Jean-François Lyotard, rather than to anything you could, remotely describe as English literature. That would be one example of something that you find if you look at the curriculum.
If I can just focus back on my question, Dr. Kantor, in the course of this focus on effete French philosophers, what are they missing? What in other words, do you believe that? When I years and years ago went through literature classes, you basically did learn. You learned Milton, and you learned Shakespeare, and you learned Dickens, and you learned the essential titans of English literature.
Right, you get immersed in Western culture.
Correct. And are you saying that no longer occurs at campuses around the country?
Well, I'm saying that it occurs less than it ought to, partly because English professors teach other things that aren't English literature, and partly because when they do teach English literature, or in this case when they teach continental philosophy instead, essentially a lot of the time what they're teaching is a very powerful critique of Western culture.
All right. Is that a fair summary of what is going on in academia today, Professor Berube?
I think it is, but I think Dr. Kantor is overlooking something. In my discussion, first of all, I'm going to make no apologies for dealing with some philosophy in my class. The quarrel between philosophy and literature goes back to Plato. And the question of whether the Republic or the Symposium is itself a work of philosophy or a work of literature is an entirely legitimate intellectual question. So
yes.
This has been a sibling rivalry that's been going on for 2,500 years. Is absolutely foundational to Western literature. The thing about my course, the thing about the philosophy parts in my course, have to do with the question of how to conceptualize fundamental disagreement, perhaps like we've got here right now. Basically, how to disagree with each other without exterminating each other. Now, that question is posed by contemporary philosophy in various ways, but also by postmodern literature in various ways. Okay. And there's nothing wrong with bringing that up.
For Dr. Kantor and Professor Berube, we're falling into a lot of buzzwords here with postmodern, and honestly, I don't think that most of our listeners will be familiar with the philosophy of Lyotard. So if we can focus on where it is that the two of you disagree, because I'm sure you disagree very strenuously. Dr. Berube, you were honored to be selected by David Horowitz as in his book, The Professors, as one of the 101 most radical and irresponsible
I think the word was dangerous, yes.
Propagandists in American academia. You wear that as a badge of pride, do you?
Well, I think it's nonsense, but yeah, sure.
Well, why is it nonsense?
Because there's nothing that I do in the classroom that is terribly radical. What David Horowitz did was take a number of my fairly standard liberal, progressive, sort of Feingold Democrat writings outside the classroom and try to construe me as some sort of fire-breathing radical in the classroom. It was a very foolish thing for him to do, and I've enjoyed it greatly.
All right.
Okay, well, can we talk about what you actually do in the classroom?
Please,
because you've written
please
a whole
do,
book
because
about
that's what your book is about. The book is called The Politically Incorrect Guide to English and American Literature. And one of the things that's interesting about the book, which is posted on our website at Michael Medved, MEDV as in victoryed.com, is that she recommends a lot of books that should be part of everyone's education that she says are being ignored by politically correct professors like our other guest, Professor Berube. Is that a fair charge? We'll get to that and more on The Politically Incorrect Guide to English and American Literature.